And welcome to The Verdict. Kent Myers here going solo for another edition of The Verdict. We're certainly glad you joined us today. Let me say at the beginning, of course, Mick Cornett can't be on because of his candidacy issues. But we hit a milestone with this show. This is our 900th show. We've been on the air a little over 17 and a half years. And we want to, Mick and I want to thank Cox, a production company that does our shows for us in a very professional manner. I want to thank our sponsors, the Verdict staff that's thin but very effective, and of course the viewers. Obviously, if we didn't have viewers tuning in week after week, we wouldn't have sponsors, we wouldn't have guests. In any event, enough of that. Happy 900th to all those that are interested. But today we're going to be taking a look at what we've entitled Oklahoma's Political Landscape. We've got a runoff election coming up in a week or so, and we've invited a guy to join us today, Dr. Keith Gaddie from the University of Oklahoma, who's going to tell us what he thinks. So sit back. I think you're going to find this to be an enjoyable show. Thanks for watching. We'll be right back in a minute or two. You're watching The Verdict.
In the early 1800s, Davy Crockett of Middle Tennessee was a neighbor to the Chickasaw Nation. He was a frontiersman who saw the sovereignty of Indian nations as the very foundation of this country, and Crockett took his ideals to Congress. So when President Jackson's Indian Removal Act came up for a vote, Crockett spoke from the heart.
4 counties of my district border on the Chickasaw country. I know many of the Chickasaws, and nothing should ever induce me to vote to drive them west of the Mississippi.
Crockett voted his conscience, effectively ending his political career. Indian removal became law. Davy Crockett left for Texas, and we took our future to Indian Territory. Chickasaw history is American history in the world we share today.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Myers flying solo today, but not completely, because we've got a very good guest to introduce to you. As I indicated in the open, Dr. Keith Gaddie is kind enough to join us today to talk about the Oklahoma political landscape. This is Keith's eighth appearance, on The Verdict. He is the Executive Faculty Fellow at the University of Oklahoma, reporting to the President. He did his undergraduate work at Florida State University, did his master's and doctorate work at University of Georgia, came to the University of Oklahoma in 1996. He is the Associate Director, in addition to his other duties, Associate Director for Intelligence and National Security Matters at the university. He also teaches. He's a professor in politics and journalism. And he's going to talk to us today about the upcoming runoff election. Keith, welcome back and thanks for joining us.
Ken, it's good to be here, and I appreciate your holding the 900th for me. Congratulations.
Well, we saved this show just for you.
Much obliged. Much obliged.
Before we get to the runoff,
yeah,
let's take a step back and talk about the primary just a minute and the voter turnout. What was, I don't need the numbers, but just generally describe the turnout and why it was as it was.
Well, record turnout for the primary. We've never had turnout that high. It was comparable to general election turnout in 2010. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know. Very high voter turnout. And the reason it was high was that we had all these open seats for statewide office, all these open seats for the state legislature, all this anger of the legislature over budgetary matters involving education, and you had medicinal marijuana on the ballot. It was like a perfect storm of issues to drive interest for voters, and they showed up. And they expressed themselves, and one thing they did is they left us with a huge field of runoffs that have yet to be resolved, mainly on the Republican side.
Well, were you surprised that the medical marijuana issue was put on the primary election? It's basically the governor declaring a special election, that being the primary.
Yeah, I think they were, my opinion is that I was not surprised when they put it there. I think they put it there in the hopes that it wouldn't pass, that you would have a more Republican than Democratic turnout in the primary, and this would be a more conservative electorate, and that they would vote down the medical marijuana issue. Instead, what happened is we discovered, among other things, that a lot of Republican voters were fine with medicinal marijuana, and a lot of people turned out just because of medicinal marijuana. Maybe, I'd say probably about 10% of the turnout bump you can attribute to the medicinal marijuana question being on the ballot. It didn't surprise us that it passed. Every time we had surveyed this issue, it was popular. 10 years ago, Bill Shepard and I had polled and found that over half of Oklahoma voters wanted it on the ballot. Now, you don't put pot on the ballot to vote against it, okay? You put it on there because you're thinking about voting for it. And so the electorate has been very consistent in wanting to see medicinal marijuana voted on in this state.
Well, were you surprised at the margin, or was the margin about what you thought on that issue?
I thought it was going to tighten up a little bit. I mean, it was pretty overwhelming. I mean, a 14-point victory for medicinal marijuana in a high turnout primary, with a lot of money arrayed against the issue.
Yeah,
so a very strong performance.
What was the ratio? Not ratio, but what was the preponderance of the money spent? That was on the negative side, was it not?
Yeah, it was primarily on the negative side.
Yeah.
But we'll go for the pun here and say it was a grassroots issue. Okay, it just played because there was a broad base. Again, there's a huge chunk of Republicans in the state of Oklahoma that are basically libertarian Republicans, and they're not particularly opposed to the idea of medicinal marijuana. They are not really that concerned about this issue. The days of railing against hippies and pot-smoking Okies from Muskogee and whatever have pretty much passed,
Yeah.
right? That part of the culture war is dead. And, so for medicinal pot to pass and to pass handily wasn't a huge surprise. I think it's about giving people choice.
Now, we don't have a similar issue on the ballot, of course, in the runoff, and we won't in the general election either. But would you expect the same kind of reaction from Oklahoma voters on the recreational marijuana question if it sometime gets on the ballot?
Yeah, I wonder. On the one hand, the activities of the state board regarding licensure and
the Board of Health.
The Board of Health distribution of medical marijuana, I think briefly emboldened the idea of putting up a vote for recreational marijuana, and it appeared to have been driving that issue and driving support for it. The governor asking them to pull back, these regulations being pulled back, being reconsidered. At the time it was done, it looked like yet again a bad faith effort to forestall what the public was demanding, which was a vote on the issue and then the implementation if it won. So the medical marijuana issue is now finished. And the thing is, though, there are still constraints on this that people need to be aware of. For example, just because you have a prescription, if you're a student on my campus, you can't have pot. There's a simple reason why. Every university in the United States that takes federal funds will not allow you to have marijuana on campus. It's a Schedule I narcotic drug in the eyes of the federal government. We can't have it on campus as a controlled substance, okay? Because if we did, we'd forfeit the ability of any student to get financial aid, right? So we're not going to do that. That's not going to happen, and the universities in the state have issued their position on this.
No dissent, I guess, among the universities.
No,
Yeah.
and there will not be.
Yeah.
I mean, this is policy, this is law.
It's too big a question.
This is the correct choice, right? This is what we must do as an institution. It's our obligation. Recreational marijuana, though, opens up the door to uncontrolled sales, distribution, and I'm just not sure that this state's quite ready to go there yet. A lot of people are looking up at what's happened with recreational marijuana in Colorado, and there are concerns that arise out of Colorado's experience. The argument for it is, well, you know, if you legalize it, you can tax it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you know, you actually don't have to legalize the thing to tax it. The state of Mississippi used to tax bootleg liquor. Back when Mississippi was dry, you can tax anything. But the thing with recreational pot is there are a variety of regulatory and other concerns that have to be addressed that I think a very conservative state like Oklahoma probably just isn't ready to jump into.
Let's change the subject.
Yeah.
Let's go to the runoff election.
Yes.
Here on August 28th.
Yeah.
We've talked about turnout starting with the primary. What do you expect about turnout in the runoff election, since there are so many races?
Well, turnout will fall by about, on the Democratic side, turnout should be very low. Okay, because principally you've got one corporation commission runoff, and then you have a congressional runoff up here in Congressional District 1 in Tulsa. Okay, so the Democratic turnout should probably fall off more because there's just not that much to drive voters to the polls. On the Republican side, however, turnout should probably run anywhere from half to 2/3 of the level it was for the initial primary. Turnout was unusually high, and usually from an initial primary to a runoff, you'd expect turnout to fall anywhere from 10% to 1/3. Without these other mobilizing issues, I'm not sure if turnout can stay quite that high, but it probably should still be record turnout for a runoff for Republicans in Oklahoma. You get into runoffs in every contest, it's really about remobilization. It's about getting your vote back to the polls again. You don't convert a lot of people in runoffs. People who voted for a third, fourth, or fifth place candidate, they often don't show up again. They often have less of a dog in the hunt, and so you have to work a lot harder to get them. So it's really about getting your own people back to the ballot, and that's why most runoffs are won by front runners. 75% of the time, the guy who wins the initial primary, leads the initial primary, should win the runoff. The odds go up as they approach 50% and as their margin over the second place finisher grows large.
Talk about availability of funds to candidates in a runoff. Is it harder to get the additional dollars you need between the primary and the runoff, or is it easier?
Well, it's in a way it can be easier because you can point to your track record, okay? And as much as voters may not show up who went third, fourth, fifth place, donors will, and you know who they are, right? Because you got that pre-48 hour and that post-48 hour filing over at the Ethics Commission, and every campaign consultant is over there pulling all of those donors and trying to find out who to target again and how to go after them. The ability to raise money is the best predictor of how you're going to do in that runoff, though. The more money that's spent in a runoff in general, the more people come back for the second round. But for a second place finisher, if they can really crank up spending other people's money, they increase their odds of overhauling the front runner. For the front runner, they're going to get their money, so it doesn't really have an impact. But for that second place finisher, to the extent they can crank up their fundraising, it heightens their prospects of winning.
Well, that's an interesting concept that I'm going to come back to. Of course, when we come back from the break, I want us to talk. I'll give a little introductory remark about the governor's race, which we won't be able to talk about because of Mick Cornett. But we will talk about other races in the state, and we will kind of analyze ones you think are more interesting. We are visiting with Dr. Keith Gaddie, professor for the University of Oklahoma, an expert in political science. You're watching The Verdict. We'll be right back.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank number 2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa. where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Myers with Dr. Keith Gaddie this week, talking about the Oklahoma political landscape. When we went to our break, we were talking about state questions. Now let's get into kind of some individual races in the runoff category. We are not going to talk about the governor's race because of Mick Cornett's connection with this show, and we just don't think it's fair to do so. So let's talk about, Keith, let's talk about the lieutenant governor's race. Let's start there and go on statewide races.
Yeah, interesting race. You know, the Republicans have held lieutenant governorship for all but 4 years of the last 30, all the last 25 years. And with Lieutenant Governor Lamb vacating the office, we have a runoff between Matt Pinnell and Dana Murphy. You know, Dana,
on the Republican side.
On the Republican side. Dana, you know, an experienced statewide office holder. Matt, a veteran GOP operative and Republican Party leader.
Has he ever been elected to anything before?
Not that I can recall.
Okay.
Not that I recall. But it's funny, with Lieutenant Governor, that's not that unusual, or at least have somebody coming out of limited political experience and making their way to lieutenant governorship. Interesting race, interesting matchup, because with the lieutenant governor's race, no one's really sure what the lieutenant governor does, other than
except the lieutenant governor.
Well, they preside over the Senate, and then they usually go around the state for 8 years campaigning for governor. Mm-hmm. That's usually what this job is. It's sort of a precursor or a precondition. Generally speaking, in runoffs, when women are running in runoffs, they usually tend to do better than men. That being said, if you're handicapping this one right now, it kind of runs under radar a bit.
Who finished first?
My gosh, I don't even remember.
Well, I think Dana Murphy did.
I think so. I think that's right. Yeah. It's actually kind of funny. For the initial primary, I was up in Boston for the university and was watching all this from a distance. But a woman coming out of first place with more than a 5-point lead should win about 90% of the time. This, I believe, was a closer race. With Pinnell, he does bring ties to a variety of conventional Republican Party operatives and donors, and experience also at the national level, working with the national party, which gives him a broader base to draw from. But it should make for an interesting race, though it is one that seems to run under radar.
Let's talk about the one that gathered a lot of attention in the primary, which was the Attorney General's race.
Yes.
Mike Hunter and Gentner Drummond.
Gentner Drummond, who has one of the most interesting names that we've seen running statewide in quite some time, probably since Virginia Blue Jeans Jenner, if I had to guess. But with Mike Hunter, Mike Hunter is an appointive Attorney General, and that's not unusual in the state to have a vacancy in that office and have a governor appoint an Attorney General. And Mike is relatively young, represents sort of a new generation of Republican politicians coming up, as does Matt Pinnell. And as Attorney General, typically if we saw an incumbent getting stuck on a runoff like this, we'd worry about them. Okay? But Mike did lead the initial round. He is the incumbent Attorney General. But this is really his introduction to the Republican primary electorate. A lot of folks don't know him. And what's interesting with Hunter is he's done a very good job consistently positioning himself on a variety of controversial issues in the state. Maybe not in terms of where the red meat is, but in terms of where law, justice, and the correct and fair decision is. And if you go back to these issues regarding the medical marijuana question and the regulations related to it, Mike Hunter cautioned the Public Health Board that they were creating a problem. So, he's presented himself as an honest broker regardless of how he may feel about that issue. And that can resonate and carry. Now, we have 3 other runoffs we probably ought to get into, though,
Okay.
because each one is intriguing for its own reason. One is the Labor Commission race, and we have 2 women in a runoff, Leslie Osborne and Kathy Costello.
Leslie Osborne, a former state representative.
Yes.
And Kathy Costello, the wife of Mark Costello.
The late Mark Costello, and this has been, Ms. Costello had sought an appointive right to Labor Commission after her husband was unfortunately murdered, and is now competing for it in her own right. She has drawn a former state lawmaker, though, and state office holders tend to make for strong candidates in running for statewide office like this. However, Kathy Costello does bring a variety of assets to the table. There are the unfortunate circumstances, the loss of her husband. There is the name recognition that follows from that as well, and the high profile that follows from that. So she does bring a variety of assets to the table, and she has been articulating a rationale for seeking this position. She's not viewing it as simply being the widow's appointment or the widow's entitlement.
Right.
The 2 that are interesting to me, though, are the state superintendent race and this corporation commission race.
Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Yeah. And,
Joy Hoffmeister.
Yeah, and has drawn Linda Murphy as an opponent. And for Joy Hoffmeister, this is the second straight election where we found an incumbent superintendent of public instruction in primary trouble. Everybody forgets Joy Hoffmeister beat outright an incumbent superintendent 4 years ago, right?
Barisi.
Yeah, Janet Barisi. But in the wake of that, she has found herself wrapped up in some controversy regarding campaign consultants and issues like that, which have cleared themselves away. But nonetheless, this got hung on her during the 2016 election campaign, even though she was not on the ballot at that point. And she came up short of a majority in the initial primary. She was well above 40% in the initial round, led by more than 5 points, and should be a shoo-in for renomination under those circumstances. But we don't quite know how this mobilization is going to go. If all of the education voters who were showing up in the Republican primary, who wanted more money for education and wanted to punish lawmakers that were opposed to more funding for education, if they're showing up, Joy Hoffmeister should do well. She was out there early in terms of her demands on the legislature to properly fund Common Ed and to do things for teachers. And therefore, she does stand here as a teacher's alternative in this race, and she should do well with that electorate. That being said, it is a runoff.
Yeah.
And you never really know with incumbents who get in runoffs. Most of the time they lose. But this one seems to be one that, this may be one of the ones where the incumbent actually pulls it out. Then we've got the Corporation Commission race.
Yes.
And this one just, Kent, why Bob Anthony, after over 20 years on the Corporation Commission, is in a runoff, just eludes me. But then you look at his opponent, Brian Bingman, former pro tem of the state senate, well-financed candidate, good candidate, bringing Bob Anthony his first really serious challenge to his incumbency. And for the Anthony campaign, it was largely not visible. This has not been a terribly visible
Bingman
campaign.
finished second, I guess.
Bingman finished second. But again, we have the same problem, an incumbent who seemingly has done nothing wrong, nonetheless getting stuck into a runoff for some reason. And you trace through all of this. You've got an appointed incumbent, Mike Hunter, in a runoff. You've got Bob Anthony in a runoff. You've got Joy Hoffmeister in a runoff. You got Kathy Costello with name recognition in a runoff. You got Dana Murphy, who is an incumbent in one office, in a runoff in another office. And there is a certain non-insider mindset at work in this Republican primary electorate right now. I think they've been irritated for a long time. And this ripples into the state legislature as well. We had an unusually large number of incumbents get thrown into runoffs. We have one up here in Metro Tulsa in the form of Mike Ritz, who not only got thrown into a runoff, but trails badly coming out of the initial round. And he has been having to get out there and do something he hasn't had to do in a decade, which is actually campaign. He hasn't had opposition since his initial election in 2008.
Keith, very interesting. I'm sorry we're out of time.
Yeah.
I wish we could do it for another 30 minutes, but maybe we'll get you back and do it again. I hope to have you back next week as a guest host, by the way. You've been visiting with Dr. Keith Gaddie from the University of Oklahoma. You're watching The Verdict. We'll be right back.
Big Tobacco lied for decades about the adverse health effects of smoking. Legally, here's what tobacco companies are forced to say now. Here's what they're really saying. Get the truth behind the lies at StopsWithMe.com, a program of TSET.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
We are a very conservative family, and we believe in old-fashioned family values. We have a loving home there, and we love kids, and we have 5, 6 of our own. And but I had no idea we were going to go into adoption, but it's been very gratifying.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And welcome back. We were very pleased to have Keith Gaddie join us on our 900th show here on The Verdict. I hope you have a better understanding of the runoff landscape that's coming up here in a couple of weeks. A couple of websites I'd like to give you for Dr. Keith Gaddie at OU. His website is www.ou.edu, and of course for The Verdict we have our own website, verdict.tv. Get on there and tell us what you'd like to see, whom you'd like to have on, and we will do our best to accommodate your wishes. We really appreciate you joining us today. You've been watching The Verdict. See you next week.